Hey guys, this is Ernesto and welcome back to yet another video. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. I'm having a wonderful day. So today I'm going to give you guys an update with my journey using the Sony A7 III, and I'm talking about a subject that I don't hear about too often on some of the review channels that's out there. And I'm very surprised that is actually happening still in 2018 on this particular camera. So stay tuned and we're going to get straight into it. Why is it overheating? See, I have it set up like this, and I've been only shooting for about maybe 30 minutes with 4K, and look, got the whole overheat signal. So I feel like every time I talk about this camera, I have to give a disclaimer, and the disclaimer is basically no one sponsored this video. I'm not sponsored by Sony. I'm not sponsored by any particular vendor or product that I will be talking about or may talk about through this video. I purchased this camera with my own money. I'm a Canon shooter for about 7+ years, and I've been using this Sony A7 III since April of 2018, and now it's October of 2018, so I've been using it for quite some time. And my intent with this video is basically to give you guys an update on my experience using the Sony A7 III, and hopefully with my experience it could offer you guys some info. I am not a camera reviewer. If you want to review a video, see a review on this camera, I suggest you hit up like the Tony and Chelsea channel, and they could probably give you more in-depth review with this camera. This is just my own personal experience with this camera. So after using this camera for several months, these are my personal loves and dislikes about this camera. Keep in mind, all these views are subjective and it's personal to me. What I like and what you like may be completely different, so just keep that in mind. The mirrorless technology is one of the things I really love about this camera, because that is the future. That is where cameras are going. Nikon and Canon realized this, and they just recently released their mirrorless cameras into this market, because that seems to be what consumers are looking for, not looking for these DSLR cameras anymore. So that's one of the things I love, and I love the fact that Sony is basically pushing the agenda with respect to this technology in the market that basically forces Canon and Nikon to follow suit. Another thing that I love about this camera is the eye autofocus for still photography. I think this is one of the best things that Sony have put into their line of camera. Because as a portrait photographer, especially if you shoot, people, if you shoot landscape or anything else other than people, I guess, is not really helpful to you. But if you're a portrait photographer, utilizing the eye autofocus, I think, is one of the best things that Sony's put in there, because it eliminates the need to focus and recompose, and all you have to worry about is worrying about your composition. Lastly, the thing that I love about this camera is the video output, especially as it relates to the sharpness. Now, when I look at my Canon, for example, my Canon 6D Mark II, which is primarily what I use for the most part for my YouTube videos, especially when I'm doing the photo shoots. Right now, I'm using the Sony A7 III to shoot this in 4K because I want to test out something else that I want to talk about later on in this video to see if it happens. But I primarily shoot with my Canon 6D Mark II. And the one thing that I noticed with that Canon 6D Mark II, which, overall that camera, I love that camera, I love utilizing that camera, but the video output from that camera from a sharpness perspective is not that sharp. And sometimes that's a good thing. You want that to be a little bit soft, and it gives you that nice feeling. It gives you a nice soft look, if that's what you're trying to go for with some of the images, especially if you want something a little bit soft. It's great. But if you're trying to do something like this, like a talking head video, for example, you want it to be a little bit more sharp, but you don't want it to be too soft. And with the Canon 6D Mark II, that's what I find the video output that I get out of that camera is just a little bit soft. Now, with respect to the Sony A7 III, when I shoot this, I basically get a nice sharp image from the video, which is really good, and that's what I love about it. Now moving on to the items that I dislike about this camera. Now the list is not very long, but these are the things that I discovered over using this camera from April of 2018 to October of 2018. So here's the list. The viewfinder is one of the things that I absolutely still dislike about this camera. Because this is a monitor, and I feel like the monitor is not very high quality, is not a high quality monitor. When I'm looking at it, it just feels like the image is just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel appropriate, doesn't look nice, right? So I feel like the LCD at the back of the camera, that image that I get from the LCD at the back of the camera is much better than the viewfinder image. It's just a significant disconnect there, and I can't get used to it. I was hoping that I could get used to it over time, but I still can't get used to it. It's just very jarring. It's very disconnecting. So I find myself using a lot more the LCD than I do the viewfinder. Another thing that I dislike about this camera is the color. Now I know you guys are gonna say, oh God, here goes again, another person talking about the color, about the Sony A7 III. And yes, I agree with you to some extent, because obviously if you shoot it in RAW, you can make the color whatever you want. I get that. And you can adjust the skin tones on your subject to whatever you want. I get that, I totally do. However, coming from a Canon, shooting from Canon, I personally, in my personal workflow, I don't do anything with respect to skin. All I do is I upload my images to Capture One. I basically do some simple adjustments with respect to exposure, shadows, and stuff like that. And then I basically put it into Photoshop, and then from there, I do a little bit more retouching, and then I do my color work within Photoshop, and then export it from Photoshop for social media consumptions or for video. And that's basically my workflow in a nutshell. But with the Sony files, I find that if I follow that same workflow, the final image that I get is significantly different than the image that I would get with my Canon. Overheating. Now, this was by far the most surprising thing to me with respect to a 2018 camera, that this camera would be overheating, and it overheat twice, not once, but twice on me. And the reason I'm using this camera right now to record this talking head session is just to see if it overheats on me a third time. So let me explain the conditions under which this camera was overheated, and perhaps maybe you guys will have a solution, or you may tell me, you know, you were doing something wrong, or whatever. You let me know. Maybe there was something I was doing wrong, or maybe there was the conditions in which this camera was under is probably why it overheated. So the camera was outside. I was shooting in direct sun. I was shooting in direct sun for several hours. I was shooting in 4K, and the flip out screen was directly against the camera, and it started to overheat. I lied. That is not true. That is not the conditions in which this camera was overheated. And obviously I realized if it was those types of conditions, yes, the camera would overheat, maybe. And I don't know if any other camera would. Maybe my Canon also might overheat as well. But the conditions in which this camera was under and how it overheated basically surprised me. I don't know why it overheated. So the conditions is the following. I'm sitting right here shooting a video, not one video, but two videos on two separate occasions. Now, this room, this house has central air, AC, and the flip out screen was not against the camera. It was actually pulled out and it was away from the back of the camera. I was actually shooting this, and I'm still shooting this in 4K, and I was shooting this for about 30 minutes or so. Now, the 30 minutes is not consecutive. It was basically 1 to 4 minutes. I'm shooting clips here and there, and then shut it off, and then collect my thoughts, and then start shooting again. So it wasn't consecutive, but it's roughly about 30 minutes. And I realized the camera was overheated. And it shocked me. It actually surprised me that it was overheating under these conditions, which is not an extreme situation. I mean, this would be the most ideal situation for any camera to not overheat, right? Because you want it to be in a cool situation. Most computers, you know, that requires a lot of processing power needs to be cooled down, and being in a cool environment helps with that. And I would assume that would be the case with this camera, but no, it overheat. I am not a videographer, but if this was my primary camera that I was using to do a job or something like that, and this was to happen to me on a particular job, I would be very upset. Reliability is very important, right? I hear a lot of talk about single card slots and the fact that, you know, Canon and Nikon both pushed out a camera with single card slots, and everybody's talking about, oh, you know, if I go on a job and I lose all my, you know, images because the card fails, you know, all valid points. You know, probably, you know, you don't want to rely on maybe a single card slot on a professional job or something like that, right? It seems to me that I wouldn't be able to rely on this camera on a professional job, because regardless of the fact that it even has 2 card slots, right? If the camera is not performing at the time that you want it to perform, then how could you rely on this camera if it's not performing the way you expect it to perform? So basically, I'm not suggesting that this is not a camera that you should get. Again, all I'm doing is just explaining from my viewpoint, my use case, and if that helps you at all, great. If you find that my experience was just isolated and it wasn't, you know, something that happened to you, you had the camera for several months as well and it never happened to you, then maybe just I have an isolated issue. But given that Sony has a history of cameras overheating, this is something that you should probably be aware of. So that is it. That was my thoughts. That was my quick update with respect to using the Sony A7III. So in summary, essentially, this camera has been great to me with respect to still photography. It has been great to me with respect to producing great sharp videos for the YouTube. And it's also been great at producing slow-mo, which is B-roll for these YouTube channels. All right, guys, that is all. I hope this video was helpful to you. If it was, please go ahead and put some comment down below. Let me know what you think. Share this video with your friends and family. And guys, if you got this far in this video and you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Oh, and by the way, it didn't overheat during the course of recording this video. And this was about maybe 40 minutes or so. So it didn't overheat. So I just wanted to say that. Bye.